Do you guys know that Iran is not the only country in the Middle East to have their nuclear program targeted? Well, today I'll be talking all about how nuclear scientists from Egypt have been targeted throughout history, and I'll be getting into the specific cases, the speculation of who was behind it, though I think we all know who it was, and I'll be talking all about it while I do my makeup. Okay, so Egypt has actually been trying to develop a peaceful nuclear program since like the 1950s, right? In fact, they even had their first research reactor in 1954. But of course, any Arab country that wants to explore defense or anything to, ensure that there won't be wiped off the map, they're stopped by, you know who, okay, and you know what. So that surprises no one, I'm sure, but it's what happened. So yeah, basically that happened in Egypt. They started off, starting a nuclear program in the 1950s, and one of the first female nuclear scientists, she was actually the first woman to study atomic radiation, I believe, or get her doctorate in atomic radiation, and she had a teaching post at Cairo University. And she one day was in Berkeley, California, where she also studied, and she's invited to this mysterious dinner, okay? And before we get into that, let me give you some context about who this woman is. So yes, she's the first woman to have a doctorate in atomic radiation, and she also went to the University of Missouri and was often targeted and suspected of bringing back like American research back to Egypt, right? So she was always subject to surveillance and things like that, and she was even denied American citizenship until later on in the 50s. She was eventually cleared of all that, and she was eventually offered American citizenship, but she was like, no, I don't want it, I want to go back home to Egypt. And she was supposed to, but before that she was in Berkeley, California, where she was invited to this mysterious dinner. She hops into a car and gets into a really tragic car accident, okay? Now what makes this really suspicious is that the driver jumped out of the car in time to save himself, and he disappeared, okay? And that invitation turned out to be fake, right? So a lot of eyebrows were raised, and a lot of people accused Meshad, which is Israeli intelligence, of setting this up, okay? Now I can understand why, and anyone who kind of follows along with the history of the region can probably also understand why this would happen as well. So that was the story of Sameera Moussa, okay? She died unfortunately really tragically on August 5th, 1952 in California. Now that's just one Egyptian scientist who was tragically targeted. There are unfortunately many more. All right, so fast forward to 1980. A man named Yahya al-Meshad was targeted as well. He was in Paris actually, and he was an Egyptian-born nuclear physicist, and he was in charge of Iraq's nuclear program, okay? So Yahya was found dead, stabbed multiple times in his hotel room in Paris by a maid, and the last person that he was seen with was a prostitute named Marie Express. Right? Now, interestingly enough, this prostitute was also killed about a few weeks later after she had given her preliminary statement, okay, and she was killed by a driver who mysteriously sped away, and he was not identified. So there was a lot of suspicion about how he was killed and who killed Yahya. And what's crazy is the following months after that, 2 Iraqi nuclear scientists were also found mysteriously poisoned outside of the country, and they were killed in separate poisoning incidents, okay? A lot of people blamed Meshad. They were like, it's definitely them and it can't be anyone else, which is a fair assumption if you know anything about like the history of the region and just like the overall climate. Like, who really wouldn't want Egypt or Iraq to have a nuclear defense system? It would be Israel, right? That makes a lot of sense. Also in the 80s, in 1989, there was another tragic killing of an Egyptian scientist. He was actually a microwave scientist, and he fell to his death from a balcony in Alexandria, Egypt. And when the police came, they reported his death as a suicide by the slashing of wrists, and they also reported the fall from the balcony. But his family quickly disputed that and said that he was not suicidal. I mean, this guy was like an international renowned scientist. His practice and his work was applied already in really important programs. And prior to coming to Egypt, he told his colleagues in Germany, he was studying in West Germany before he went to Egypt, that he thought that he was being surveilled, okay? So there was a lot of speculation that, again, this was Meshad sabotaging another Egyptian nuclear scientist, and unfortunately he fell victim to this mission. Now this isn't just a matter of history, okay? This also happened in 2019 when a man named Abu Bakr Ramadan, probably one of the most Muslim names you can think of, who was also an Egyptian scientist. I'm sorry, he wasn't a scientist, he was a former head of Egypt's radiological monitoring program, and he was found suspiciously dead in his hotel room at 61 years old. So after he left the workshop, he was reportedly very tired, and then he was just found laid dead in his room. And what's interesting is that the initial report that came out after he was found dead was that he died of a heart attack, but later news circulating showed that he actually was killed of poisoning. So that has a lot of speculation, and it wasn't just like kind of speculated by people like you and I, it was also speculated or members of the Defense and Security National Committee, like Khalid Abu Talib, who was saying that like we really need to start investigating this because it's getting out of hand. Like Egypt has a history of, their brightest getting targeted, especially when they're involved in any kind of nuclear program. Okay, so Iran is definitely not the only country in the Middle East to be targeted like this, unfortunately, and I don't think that it will be the last. But interestingly enough, Egypt is actually gearing towards creating another or restarting another nuclear program that should be up and running in 2026, and this is a multi-billion-dollar program, okay? And to give you some more context, this really isn't anything new with like the targeting of nuclear programs, right? So back in the 50s, Egyptians used to work with German scientists for their nuclear programs, and these German scientists were former Nazis, right? So this really shook up Israel, and there were even like operations to target these nuclear programs. For example, there was an operation called Operation Damokal, which basically went after these German scientists in Egypt, killing one of them. And then there were also like threats to these nuclear scientists' families. And then there was also like the actual killing of Egyptians when Israelis would send like letter bombs to like rocket facilities and whatever. So it was a really, really hostile mission to target these scientists, right? And in Egypt. And it got so bad that the person who was running this program's operation was forced to resign in Israel because it was very, very aggressive. And that just gives you some context of like how this has always been approached from like the start. So like that's when the nuclear program started in the 50s in Egypt, and that's when it was also targeted. Okay, and like I said, they're gearing up to kind of start their own program again. That should be launched in 2026. Let's see how that goes. But yeah, it's completely in the works, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so that basically covers all of the instances where nuclear scientists were targeted in Egypt, and I'm almost at the completion of my makeup for today, and I'm really curious to know what you all thought of this. Who you guys think is behind all these killings? I told you what everyone else thinks, but I'm curious to know if you think it's somebody else or something else. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching, as always. If you guys enjoyed this, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It means a lot to me to hear your support and your thoughts. And I will see you all on the next video. And as always, all sources in the comments.